You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks and a very special episode. Here today we listen to a LEGO Star Wars Terrifying Tales roundtable with director Ken Cunningham and executive producer David Shayne. We talk about the creation of it, loads of questions, looking at what came together to make LEGO Star Wars Terrifying Tales the wonderful little 45-minute adventure that it is. So we'll go straight over with no further ado. Myself representing Making Tracks and Fantha Tracks and many fellow podcasts and websites, talking to two of the creatives behind LEGO Star Wars Terrifying Tales. Enjoy! So the first question came from Fangirls Going Rogue, and the question was, the Wren, he debuted in the comic series, but how did he come to be in this show, and will we ever see him again?
I can't speak to the latter. To the former, you're right. Yeah, he appeared in the comics, and what we knew when we were putting the special together is we wanted to tell three kind of mini stories, one each from each of the different eras, and Ben Solo and as Kylo, and sort of that journey for him was a story we want to tell. And we realized, well, Ren was the natural. And so you're absolutely right. Like, it was fun to sort of take that from the comics and transfer it to screen. And then we were doing this kind of 80s style little featurette there. So yeah, Christian Slater's the one to go. I mean, he was our first choice, and we got him, and we were just thrilled. So it was incredibly fun to bring that to life.
Yeah, and then we leaned into that visually too. Like, so we gave him the mullet, and luckily that existed in Lego canon. We didn't make that up. That's an official air piece.
And next up was a question from me, Fantha Tracks. Evening, everyone. Given their amazing skills, when you're designing the sets, when the sets, essentially the digital sets, are being built for these LEGO creations, are actual LEGO designers ever involved in that? Because obviously there's a parity between models and the CG world. Is any of that brought together in any way?
I mean, obviously we're utilizing some of the actual sets. So we're bringing that in, placing in world, and then my design team takes that and sort of builds around it. We try and it's like a 70-30 rule in terms of like organic versus Lego in terms of the way we design the set, although, the organic part isn't really organic either, but just, non-Lego pieces is kind of like an ethos we try and bring to the picture. And, obviously with a lot of the stuff then goes back to Denmark, and we get feedback from that team in terms of anything that, is very Lego specific, and just to make sure that everything is kosher.
Next up, it was Friends of the Force, and they asked, with Star Wars having been around for 40 years, how do they balance the Lego brand, Halloween itself, and Star Wars, and make it work in a way that works directorially and as a story? How do they merge all those things together?
That's a great question, Sarah. It's sort of, the Lego Star Wars brand has been around, I want to say off the top of my head, around 20 years. So we are standing on the shoulders of giants, going all the way to back when people introduced the video games, and certainly the previous specials. So by this point, a lot of that groundwork has been laid out for us, which is really fun. I always say that Lego Star Wars is canon adjacent. So we're trying to honor canon. We're using real characters from canon. We try to respect the timeline, all that, and then obviously take it to a silly and fun, whimsical Lego place. And so that becomes a leap off. The interesting thing for us is that with Halloween, we got to push that even a little further. I think we got to go even a little sillier and a little weirder because it's Halloween. And you can sort of do these Simpson-style treehouse of horror stories. So those three mini stories within the special let us even push a little bit further and go to kind of some really bizarre, but hopefully funny places. And then, so we do all that in the script, and then we record it, and then we hand it off to Ken.
I really approach this stuff like I'm shooting a real film in a Lego world. Like, that to me informs a lot of the choices I make. And then, like David said on this one, like we're just looking at all these horror films and how to bring that stuff in, and then trying to find the line of like how scary you go, because, obviously our demo is not a typical horror demo, But I mean, the comedy and the Lego itself, like, actually lets us push maybe a little further than you could normally, just because the humor of using Lego undercuts it. Yeah, visually, like the big one for me was Bram Stoker's Dracula. That film is extremely theatrical in the way it uses lighting. And so I sort of brought that to my art director and was like, dude, this is what I want to do. And, so then we that springboard us into this place where we used color as a storytelling tool.
Hi, this is Amy Ratcliffe, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Next up, it was the team at Full of Sith, and they pointed out that Vanay, a character that we've seen in Rogue One and Star Wars Adventures, we've seen him before, but when did the team realise that he was the right character to be part of the framework of this Terrifying Tales episode?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's funny because you used the right word, which is framework, is we knew we were sort of actually starting from this place of wanting to tell these mini stories, and how do we surround that with a story that anchors all of that. If those are little stories we're telling around the campfire or in the haunted house, what's the haunted house we go through? And sort of that went to Vader's castle. And once we went there, we realized, oh, Vinay, it's perfect. As you've had exactly right. We've seen him in Rogue One and we've seen him in the comics. And to my knowledge, this is the first time we've gotten to hear him speak on screen. So we realized, oh, and he's kind of nutty. So he can be telling these weird off-kilter stories that let us, as I was saying earlier, sort of push that humor a little further. And then we just got really lucky with casting and got Tony Hale, who just, as you guys heard, crushed it. His recording helped inform the character and actually even pushed it further. And then we sort of realized, all right, we got to keep pushing this character and we can just go really nutty because Tony could kind of do anything. And it just came out. We were thrilled. So I'm glad you picked up on that, enjoyed it. And then, well, Ken, will you tell them like the visual side of Tony too?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like, it was just like so great in the record. Like, he is extremely mobile and expressive when he's recording. So he'd be like leaning into things and doing all these wacky things with his body. So I was like, oh, we absolutely have to use that. I mean, again, the minifigs aren't that mobile. Like, there's a certain rule set we have to adhere to in terms of like how far we can break the figure in terms of the mobility. But like, we tried to push them as far as we could towards what Tony did in the records.
Next up was my old haunt at Jedi News. They mentioned the obvious amount of dad jokes in this Lego special and asked how they make sure that there are jokes for all ages in these Lego specials.
I've been doing dad jokes long before I was a dad. So, it's in part, I mean, that's the fun thing about Lego Star Wars is they really are, I mean, I know it's a bit of a cliche word, but they are family and you're trying to include everybody. So there really is something you're hoping all ages and everybody will enjoy. I'm hoping parents and kids will be watching this together. And, I'm sure there's going to be horror movie references that the parents may get that the kids don't. So as long as, if I get to do more of these, there'll be more dad jokes. So fingers crossed.
Next up, it's the turn of Rebel Scum. And they asked, how did they choose the horror stories that were the influences for the short stories, the 3 short stories in Terrifying Tales? How did they choose those stories?
It's a great question. It's a virtual, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it was a virtual whiteboard.
Yeah.
So what we knew is that pretty early on, we really wanted to represent all 3 eras. So we wanted to do the prequels and the classic trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And we wanted to try to showcase and highlight the villains. So we knew we would be able to get Vader through the castle, but so we want and that he would be in the classic story. So it was pulling those villains. So you sort of started from there. The Wookiee's Paw story, for whatever reason, was the first one that came to me. That one is as close as we have to sort of spoofing an existing story, and it's really taking that tale and putting the Star Wars lens on it. And then you just start kind of piecing things together and working backwards, and you go, okay, what sort of story could we tell with Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren? Well, all right, that's starting to feel like an 80s horror film. What does that look like? So you sort of work through that. There's no magical formula. You just ask a lot of what ifs and questions. And what's really fun is just there's an enormous number of people who are involved, all of whom are created and excited to be doing this. And so it just becomes bouncing ideas back and forth. And then that just continues right on, once we're done with the script and Ken's team gets their hands on it, it's just where else can we keep doing that?
Next up, it was the Skywalking Network, and they asked the guys what things did they want to see on screen that they could have added into here that they've never seen before. And the example that was given by Skywalking Network was seeing Princess Leia as an X-Wing pilot.
Well, you kind of stole mine. It's funny, like it was really fun to get to see her do that. And once we realized, okay, we're playing Luke as a bad guy, we can make Leia a good guy, and we get to keep Obi-Wan alive, and she gets to lead the battalion, and like that felt really good. I won't count this as righting a wrong, but and I will give full credit to our voice director, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn. But in that same Wookiee's Paw story, I'd written this thing, and Ken had animated this fabulous sequence where it's Luke running around with Vader on his back like Yoda. They're training. And then somewhere I was like, oh, yeah, well, let's definitely do the swing. And we're in the recording studio, and Mary just, who's a brilliant director, but is also really funny. She goes, oh, what if Vader plants a kiss on Luke and goes, for luck? And we're like, yes, do that. And it's like my which I can't take any credit for. It's all Mary. Again, it's not righting a wrong, but that moment I was just like, oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
Ken, what about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's my favorite too. Like, I think everybody is just like, oh my God, Mary, like, oh, thank you. You know?
And we're back in this round table to the first people. It's Fangirls Going Rogue. Their question was, are there any links to the Freemaker adventures? And also, one of the jokes seemed to heavily lean on Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Fangirls wanted to know if that was the case.
The big Freemaker connection in there obviously is Graballa. He's such a funny character, and he was really funny on Freemaker, and Dana Snyder, who plays him, is hilarious. So that, I mean, that is sort of the most direct Freemaker connection. I do see your parallels with Dean. There was just sort of a logical connection. I wouldn't say that was particularly on purpose, but look, any chance you get to have a connection to I loved working on Freemaker. If you look at the end credits, we were really lucky to get Bill Motz and Bob Roth in for our punch-up session. I was like, guys, I got to meet them through that, and we're still friends. I was like, please come do this. Like, Graballa's there. I just want to make sure we're honoring the voice in this world you created. Monty Python, if we got that,
that one wasn't totally intentional. I mean, I remember thinking that, but we didn't lean into it. We did have another one that ended up kind of getting cut though, like when he gets pushed off the balcony by the Emperor and he falls. And in my board and the kind of the first couple of iterations of the animatic, we kept cutting back and forth. Like, so it's the knight running across the plane gag. We had to lose it for a time because we had to, you have to cut stuff.
Back to Fantha Tracks for our second question.
The Vader's Castle concept, it's become a bit of a staple over the last few years in Star Wars, especially at this time of year, obviously. As a concept, do you think there's more legs in it than just doing occasional things, specials and IDW with the comics? Do you think there's something more substantial that you could do with it, certainly in terms of Lego Star Wars?
Yeah, no, I think it has huge potential myself, David.
I mean, it was certainly fun to get to dive in there and explore. And I know there's a VR game, and obviously they've used it in the comics. So let's hope they do more. I have to say, it's like a place to play creatively. It was a no-brainer as a haunted house, and it was incredibly fun to get to explore in both the literal and creative sense.
Back to Friends of the Force with their second question. They asked about the inspiration behind Dean and also whether they looked at any other mentor-mentee relationships, specifically Poe and Leia in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, I think you really got that right. Dean sort of came about in part, often particularly in Lego, but it's nice, and in Star Wars, it's nice to have a kid's point of entry. So he was a really good character to have, and it was fun to sort of contrast him with Poe, who is sort of all swagger and confidence, and watch Poe kind of learn, like, okay, you don't always have to be the coolest guy in the room, and that's okay to be being vulnerable is okay. And Dean learning through Poe that also even the person you think is always brave and is never scared, they get scared too, and that's okay. And so, yeah, I do think some of that does come from Poe growing as a leader, which was a journey we got to see, as you put it really well, in the sequel trilogy. So there was a lot of that. And so it was really fun, and it was fun watching Jake and Raphael. Actually, we got to have them. All these records were done over Zoom. It was done during the pandemic, and it was just, we actually did get to have them virtually working off each other a little bit, and they had like insta chemistry. I mean, I thought, Ken,
yeah, no, it was great.
Yeah, it was very sweet. Their relationship was really very sweet. Like, it was fun to watch them do that.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Back to Full of Sith for their second question. They asked about bringing in Graballa the Hutt from Freemaker Adventures and what it was like working with that character and the voice actor behind him.
You write lines for Dana, And he does those lines. And then he also improvises such hilarious lines. And the real difficulty working with Dana is that it's an embarrassment of riches. And you could practically do a Grabala special. So you start going, oh my gosh, what is essential? What do we keep and what do we have to cut? So it came about in part as we, I can't remember where we originally had once we knew we were doing Vader's Castle, in one of our creative meetings with me and the folks at Lucasfilm and Lego, we said, someone just said, like, what if we brought Grabala back? And hey, he's kind of this slimy businessman. What if he tried to turn it into a luxury hotel, which we also saw him, he had his beachside resort in Freemaker. So it just felt like a natural place to sort of take Grabala. Bill and Bob said to me, they're like, yes, Dana's great and he will be funny all on his own. And it's absolutely true. And he's so game. And it was as much just ensuring sort of at the script stage that, like, I just want to make sure, like, we have the lines that Dana will then take and Dana all over them in the best possible way.
Back to the second question from Jedi News, and they asked, in regards to the digital Lego sets that they use in Terrifying Tales, are there any of those sets that they would like to see become physical Lego sets, actual buildable Lego sets?
Well, I mean, there's like Vader's Castle exists, but I would love to see like the broader Mustafar. That would be awesome. Yeah, kind of everything really. Like I can't even make a choice on that. Like, and there's nothing I wouldn't want to see. David?
Well, now that you say it, James, that occurred to me. And Ken, I feel like we have to put in a call and beg Jason Kostler. I really would love to see Wookiee's paw, Luke, and Vader, and Leia flying her X-wing, and Obi-Wan in Red 5. Like I would love to do Bizarro Lego.
I mean,
guys, make it happen. Y'all are the ones to make it happen, please.
Yeah, it'd be super cool to do like the Luke and Vader swinging across the chasm as a set. Oh yeah.
Back to Rebel Scum for their second question. They asked what was their favourite scene from Lego Star Wars Terrifying Tales.
Something you hit on, Michael, which is right. It's like, it was so fun to go, what little Easter egg, what little spoof can we do? What can we pay homage to? What can we reference and sort of, but organically, and not just have it be there for a reference, but be something funny and that felt good in the story. So that was incredibly fun to do. I mean, I'll admit, I think I said at one point, the Wookiee's Paw story kind of came to me very early on, that I loved living in that world. It was very fun to get to do. And that was the one that just, for me, was in an incredibly creatively satisfying project that may have been the most creatively satisfying. But I mean, truthfully, it was a joy from start to finish. I love getting to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think from like a storytelling standpoint or a story standpoint, my favorite was Wookiee's Paw. But from a fun, like directing, making something standpoint, for me, Lost Boys, especially the whole dream sequence montage, like that was so much fun. Like, and we just like, there's so many references that get packed in there that were started in the script, but then visually, stuff we added in as we were going along. And you've got like Village of the Damned, you've got Lost Boys, you've got Nightmare on Elm Street, and there was just so much some Twilight Zone stuff, like with him falling into Ren's head. So much fun.
I will also say, Ken reminded me in the Lost Boys sequence when Michael Kramer, our composer, turned in the soundtrack. And he was like, hey, guys, I'm worried it's too much synthesizer. And everybody well here was like, no, we'd like more synthesizer. Just keep pushing it. And he was so game. And I remember as we were doing all the way through for every layout, and even when we got to the sound mix in Star Wars, the clue horn, the shirtless Biff who's playing the clue horn on the beach. It was just like, more clue horn, louder clue, just keep pushing that clue horn. And it was that was incredibly fun.
Yeah.
That was a highlight for me for sure.
The problem with the Lego minifigs is they're just flat and decal. And I really would have loved to grease that guy up like the guy in Lost Boys. but it just visually, it visually wouldn't work. But, I had a fantasy that somehow we could do that.
Next up was Friends of the Force with an excellent question. What was the process behind the line, without fear, you can't have courage, a line that comes near the end of the episode? Was there any workshopping behind that? Where did that concept come from?
We were a couple of drafts into the script, and we knew like Poe was going to have this moment where he kind of revealed like it's okay to be scared. And we had words to that effect, but it wasn't quite hitting. And again, this was all done during the pandemic and with everything that was going on. And, I think we were all feeling scared. The world still feels scary, frankly, but felt very scary. And my wife, and I've asked her, I don't know if she heard this somewhere else, but just at dinner one night said, without fear, we were talking to our kids, said, without fear, you can't have courage. And I did that kind of nerdy writer thing where I sort of was like, oh, hold on. And I like ran downstairs and emailed the gang. I was like, I think we found it. So I'm very touched that you tapped into that, because that really resonated for me. And it's a lesson I'm relearning all the time. It's certainly something I want my kids to understand, that, it is okay to be scared. We are all scared. It is what we do in the face of fear. And so it was really nice to have Poe, our coolest, most swaggery character, acknowledge that and pass that lesson on to Dean, and to see Dean use that in the end.
Hi, Paul Blake here, Greedo from Star Wars A New Hope, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Back to Fangirls Going Rogue for their third question. They asked a tricky question. Which of the characters in LEGO Star Wars Terrifying Tales is their favourite? But also, of the two specials they've done, including last year's Holiday Special, which do they prefer, Terrifying Tales or Holiday Special?
Okay, the second one first. It's a little bit like asking me which my favorite child is. They know. No. The truth is, I love getting to work on both of them equally. They are very different experiences. We really try to lean into the tropes of the holidays for each of them. So, I do think, maybe, Ken, you feel this way sometimes when you're working on a project. Half the time you get nostalgic about the thing you worked on, and the other half you've seen that thing so many times, and the other thing is new and that becomes shiny. So it goes back and forth. So it really would depend on when you ask me. The honest answer is I do love them both. Gosh, in terms of character, I want to hang out in this one. I found Dean really fun. He was just a great kid. Our actor Raphael brought an enormous amount of life to him, and just really imbued him with a lot of heart. And I would hang out with that kid. I like hanging out with my kids. He'd be fun to have along too. What about you, Ken?
Yeah, no, it's the same thing for me. You're always kind of enthralled with the thing that you're working on. But then when you are having trouble and struggling with problems in it, you start to sort of like the whole nostalgia thing with previous. So for me, the first one was the first time I got to play in the Star Wars universe. So that was a big one for me. I was of the generation, I was 10 when Star Wars came out. I was that generation of kids. I saw it 20 times in the theater. For me, it's been a lifelong thing, right? There's a thing about the first one for me that's attached to that, but I really love the new one. In terms of characters, in all honesty, I love the Gonk droid. I'm always looking for opportunities to stick the Gonk droid in the background, and I just he's kind of like my go-to. Oh yeah, let's stick a Gonk droid in there, and I'd imagine he'd have some interesting things to say.
What would he have to say? Maybe Gonk or Gonk? Maybe
Gonk. Gonk. Gonk.
Gonk.
Next up was me again with my third question.
I managed to watch a couple of episodes of Galaxy of Sound earlier, which not only showed you how brilliant the sound work was on those films, but it makes you realise how essential John Williams' score was to the Star Wars saga and Mando and everything else. Obviously, Ludwig does Mando. In your experience, the music in this is fantastic. How much does that sort of firm up an episode once you've scored it? How much of a difference does that make?
It's big. We right from the beginning, we temp stuff into the edit, just so myself and the exec producers can kind of see how something's playing. When you strip the music off, it actually becomes hard to parse, how it really brings a lot to the scene. And then Michael Kramer, our composer, we get access to a limited number of Williams cues, which we use, but he really threads the needle in terms of writing around that stuff and twisting it, which really became key in the Halloween special, him being able to take kind of a classic Williams thing and then twist it a little bit so that it plays dissonantly. Yeah, he just brought so many smart, interesting ways to kind of thread that musical needle. Super invaluable.
Michael's just an incredibly talented composer. The other thing he brings to the table is he's able to do action in the action sequences and big epic scores when you need an epic moment, but he also knows comedy really well. He knows where to go dry in music and let the joke stand. He knows where a little sting is going to add 5% or 10% to that really funny physical moment that Ken's team has animated. He's just got really, really good instincts for it. But to your original question, Mark, it brings everything. It just adds, whenever you hear it without score, without temp music, to Ken's point, you're like, oh no. And then the music comes like, oh no, this totally works. And it's funny. I remember a million years ago watching a profile of John Williams, and they showed this scene in Empire on Bespin where Han, it's the I love you, I know moment. And they show it once dry with just the sound effects. And you're like, And then they put in the music, and it just, I think, don't we all bow down to John Williams? It's enormous.
Back once again to Friends of the Force for their third question. Both Ken and David worked on last year's LEGO Star Wars Holiday Special. So what did they bring from that experience to this experience, And what was it from making the Star Wars Holiday Special, Lego Holiday Special, that helped them make Terrifying Tales even better?
It was so thrilling to get asked back. The Holiday Special was just a dream project, and it was really, it was bringing the band back together. It was the entire same team from Lucasfilm and from Lego, and knowing we were working with Atomic again, Josh Rhimes and James Waugh and Leland Shee and Jason Kosser, and I'm going to end up leaving out names, so I'll stop. It's just an enormous amount of fun to get to work with all of them. And then when you do it again, you have a little bit of a shorthand. You just have a little bit of a creative shorthand. So something that you might have had to, either they would have had to explain to me, or I would have to try to explain my intent. Like, you just start to get it. You just get each other's rhythms, and frankly makes it easier. That ended up being really vital because, again, this started, I was looking back, I literally started pitching this, I think maybe a week after lockdown had started. So now knowing we're going to all be doing this from the air quote comfort of our own homes meant having that shorthand was vital. The time was short. It's a pretty fast production schedule. Ken, I'm curious, the production side, what'd you?
Again, like you said, getting to be asked back was just absolutely so great. Like, I don't know what I'll do after, we don't have this stuff to work on. Like, in terms of like the COVID thing, like we were in the middle of the holiday special, and like I think we had just entered layout, which is essentially when we go from boards into like 3D assets and start to put the camera together and block the shots out and stuff. So the team, like, we all got sent home. I essentially started directing like this. So that brought on a whole bunch of challenges. And so what was nice about Terrifying Tales is we'd kind of gone through that already. Like, and now it's old hat. Like, we worked through all the problems, communication issues, and, how to keep a team motivated when they're by themselves at home, just how to communicate everything that needs to have to get communicated and keep the ball rolling. By the time we went into Terrifying Tales, we'd worked all that stuff out, and now it's running extremely smoothly.
The final question was from the team at Full of Sith, and this was an essential question. What Halloween costume would Graballa the Hutt wear to a Halloween party?
Wow.
Gold LeMay.
Yes! Yes!
I don't know what the costume would be, but it'd be Gold LeMay. David, what do you think?
Oh, man. Oh, what costume would Graballa... I think Graballa is insecure enough that he might go as Jabba. What? I'm Jabba. It's good. My terrible Dana Snyders. I'm going to apologize to Dana for me now. Maybe he would just go as Jabba and get annoyed.
That's all from this special episode of Making Tracks from the LEGO Star Wars Terrifying Tales Fan Roundtable. If you want to be part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fantatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fantatracks.com. Please send your questions in. We're always looking for stuff to talk about. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune into our weekly Fantha Tracks news show, Good Morning Tatooine, live most Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And as always, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.